Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources and, well, really try to unearth the most fascinating insights.
That's the goal.
Today, we're embarking on an extraordinary journey. We're diving deep into one specific year, 537 AD.
A single year, but with huge implications, according to our source.
Exactly. It's a year Noel suggests is far more pivotal, maybe more mysterious, than conventional history lets on.
All right.
So our core topic for this deep dive is this alleged connection, and it's a deeply controversial one, between 537 AD and the legendary fall of Camelot.
Yeah, linking a specific date to a legend like Camelot is bound to stir things up.
Definitely. Our primary source material comes directly from Noel Joshua Hadley's paper, 537 AD, The End of Camelot. It was originally published November 16, 2023.
But there have been updates, right? Crucial ones.
Crucial updates, November 27, 2023, then May 26, 2025, June 12, 2025, and there's also an additional note from May 18, 2025 we need to consider. So it's evolving work.
Always good to have the latest context.
Our mission today is, well, to unpack Noel's incredibly detailed, really multi-layered arguments. He connects things that might seem completely separate.
Like what?
Well, things like ancient climate catastrophes, volcanic winters, the sciencey stuff.
Okay.
And connect that directly to those most famous Arthurian legends. And even profound biblical interpretations.
Wow, that's quite a synthesis.
It is. And he uses all this to paint a provocative new picture of what Noel calls his story.
H-I-S-S-T-O-R-Y.
Exactly. He spells it that way intentionally. He's suggesting that recorded history, what we read in textbooks, has been actively manipulated, controlled even.
By certain dominant powers.
That's the implication, that it's not just an objective account of the past. So get ready to question what you thought you knew about the Dark Ages. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, you really have to set aside preconceptions here. The scope of Noel's work is, well, ambitious is putting it mildly. It's audacious, really. Because it directly challenges these established historical narratives we all grew up with, he's synthesizing information from incredibly diverse fields.
Like you said, ancient chronicles, etymology, biblical prophecy.
Exactly. It's everything. This isn't something you can just skim. It demands a careful, very detailed examination of his claims and the specific evidence he presents. You have to follow his threads.
And right from the start, he flags the year before 537, right? 536 AD.
He does. And what's particularly striking is his perspective on 536 AD. He doesn't just see it as, a bad weather year.
No.
He called it an irreversible threshold. Even more dramatically, the year of the fire reset.
A fire reset. What does he mean by that?
He's implying a catastrophic, world-altering event. And crucially, Noel believes this wasn't just some random natural disaster. He sees it as a deliberate reset of global civilization, something that fundamentally set the stage for everything he talks about in 537 AD.
So 536 is the cause, 537 the effect, in a way.
In a very direct way, yes. And to really grasp his full argument, Noel points you to several of his other papers.
Like which ones?
Things like Kings and Priests of the MK, 536 AD Melted Cities, and another called The 7,000-Year Timeline Deception.
Wait, so this 537 paper isn't standalone. It fits into a much bigger picture he's painting.
Precisely. It underscores that this deep dive into 537 AD is part of a much broader, interconnected research framework he's developed over time. He's building this cumulative case spanning millennia, really asking us to consider a radically different historical timeline.
And Noel jumps right into that connection, doesn't he? Linking 537 AD directly to those catastrophic events of the year before.
Immediately. It's not just background, it's the trigger.
He sees 537 AD not just as some historical oddity, but as flowing directly from this preceding cataclysm, this fire reset he talks about.
Yes, suggesting it wasn't merely natural, but somehow deliberate. A world-altering event designed maybe to erase a specific era?
So let's get specific. What exactly happened in 536 AD, according to Noel, and how does he instantly connect that devastation to the end of a legendary kingdom like Camelot? It seems like quite a leap.
Well, Noel doesn't waste any time making that leap. It's central to his whole thesis. He describes 536 AD as this massive fire reset.
The one with 18 months without the sun.
That's the one. It's a clear reference to what historians conventionally call the volcanic winter of 536 AD. Widespread cooling, darkness.
Usually attributed to big eruptions like in El Salvador or Iceland, right?
That's the standard explanation, but Noel sees it differently. He posits it wasn't just localized, it had a profound global impact, literally shrouding the skies in this mysterious fog.
And he mentions melted cities too.
He does. He dramatically puts it that in other places it caused entire cities melted, which is obviously a very extreme claim.
Okay, so what's the key piece of evidence he uses to link this 536 disaster to 537 in Camelot?
This is really central to his argument. He highlights an entry he found in the Annales Cambria.
An old Welsh chronicle.
Exactly, and for the specific year, AC 537, this chronicle states, and this is the quote, Noel focuses on the action of Camlan, in which Arthur and Medrawt fell, and there was a plague in Britain and Ireland.
Arthur and Medrawt. That's Mordred.
Medrawt is the Welsh form, yes. So the Battle of Camlan, Arthur and Mordred fall, and a plague.
So how does Noel interpret that?
He sees the plague mentioned there not as some random disease outbreak, but as an obvious result of the sun being absent for so long.
Linking the environmental disaster directly to the chronicle entry.
Precisely. He links the 536 AD disaster to the specific events noted for 537 AD in this historical record. And that, for him, is a direct connection to the fabled End of Camelot, because the chronicle explicitly mentions Arthur's final battle at Camelot.
It's a very direct reading of that entry.
It is. But what's really insightful, or maybe unsettling, depending on how you look at it, is Noel's Orwellian interpretation of this whole sequence.
Orwellian. How so?
He suggests that Camelot, which he views symbolically as a kingdom of light, may be an era of enlightenment, ended abruptly with what he calls the rude interruption of the Dark Ages. But for Noel, the Dark Ages weren't just, a period of cultural decline.
What were they then?
He sees them as a deliberate obscuring of truth, a kind of historical blackout. He argues that this era of light, this Camelot-style civilization, wouldn't presume again for another 1,000 years, not until what we call the Enlightenment.
So he's saying the Dark Ages were manufactured almost.
That's the implication. That this wasn't just a sequence of events, it was a narrative constructed to hide a deeper truth. That the Dark Age was a mechanism for control, for suppressing knowledge.
Okay, and what Noel proposes next is where his analysis takes, I think, a really provocative turn. He's inviting us to look for a different layer of meaning entirely.
Yeah, he really pushes the boundaries here.
He suggests this isn't just history as we know it, but an allegory indeed. Yeah. Like a hidden message being told, maybe veiled for centuries.
That's exactly his angle.
And it's not just the fact of the battle that fascinates Noel, but the different accounts of it that he unpacks. He's looking for deeper truths hidden in their discrepancies, right?
Precisely. He delves into these various accounts of the Battle of Camelot, laying them out side by side. Not just to show they differ, but to highlight what he believes are underlying allegorical truths, maybe designed to obscure the real history.
So which accounts does he look at?
First, there's Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia, hugely influential, written around 1136.
What's the story there?
In Geoffrey's version, Arthur goes off to France to fight a Roman leader, Lucius Tiberius. He leaves his nephew, Mordred, in charge of Camelot.
Big mistake, presumably.
Huge. While Arthur's away, Mordred betrays him. Mary's Arthur's wife, Guinevere, tries to claim the throne.
Wow.
So Arthur returns, confronts Mordred at the River Camel in Cornwall. Geoffrey describes it as just a bloodbath for both sides, a classic tale of betrayal and devastating conflict.
Okay, that's one version. What else?
Then Noel brings in the Lancelot Grail cycle. He notes this is supposedly a gross embellishment from 13th century France.
So a later, perhaps more romanticized version?
Possibly. And the narrative shifts. Here, Arthur goes to France not to fight Welsmans, but to confront Lancelot.
Because of the affair with Guinevere.
Exactly. And in this version, Lancelot actually kills Mordred's siblings, Agravain, Gaheris, and Gareth, who were also Arthur's nephews.
Man, talk about family drama.
Right. But just like in Geoffrey's version, Mordred gets left in charge and betrays Arthur.
Okay.
But here's a significant detail Noel flags: the composition of Mordred's army. He says it mostly consisted of Saxon and Irish allies, and crucially, it outnumbered Arthur's forces 2-1.
Saxons fighting with Mordred against Arthur.
According to this version, yes. And Noel explicitly tells us, take a mental note of the Saxons. He's hinting this isn't just a footnote, it's a vital clue to a larger deception.
What kind of deception?
He even makes this provocative comparison, saying, unlike the Apollo 11 hoax, there is more than meets the eye to the Saxon invasion, suggesting an intentional cover-up in the historical narrative.
Okay, keeping that Saxon note in mind. What else from the Lancelot Grail cycle?
Well, ironically, it suggests the whole war might have been kicked off by accident. A startled knight draws his sword against a viper during tense negotiations.
And everyone thinks it's a signal to attack.
That's the idea,
Yeah.
triggering the full-scale battle unintentionally. But regardless of the cause, the result was devastating. Many kings aligned with Arthur, Knights of the Round Table killed, Mordred killed, Arthur mortally wounded, taken off to Avalon.
Excalibur.
Returned to the Lady of the Lake, Guinevere becomes a nun, Lancelot a monk, seeking penance. This, Noel states, was the definitive end of Camelot, the abrupt beginning of what he calls the Age of the Saxons.
So what Noel unearths in these differing accounts isn't just, historical inconsistency. He argues they're clues to something deeper, maybe unsettling. He delves into what he provocatively calls the complex and indeed disturbing incestuous elements in the stories, particularly around Mordred's lineage. He thinks this reveals a hidden pattern.
He definitely doesn't shy away from the uncomfortable bits. He highlights that Mordred is explicitly called the son of King Arthur and Morgause, Queen of Orkney.
Right.
But then he adds this layer of complexity, urging us to remember it. Morgause shared Arthur's mother, Igraine, through Igraine's first husband, Gorlois.
Making Arthur and Morgause half-siblings.
Correct. Which means Mordred was not only Arthur's son, but also his nephew.
Son and nephew, that's complicated.
Very. And this complex, almost deliberately tangled family structure for Noel isn't just a lurid plot point. He suggests it's part of a deeper, maybe hidden narrative. A deliberate weaving of, let's say, unclean elements into the very foundation of Camelot. And we'll see this becomes central to his argument about the true nature of Arthur's kingdom.
Okay, so from the fall of Camelot and its tangled origins, Noel then pivots. He moves to this startling reevaluation of the Saxon invasion.
Completely flips the script on that.
He suggests it wasn't an invasion as we typically think of it, but something else entirely. Something with maybe profound biblical and historical implications.
Right. He asks us to consider that the very name Britain might hold a hidden meaning that unlocks this whole radical reframing.
Okay, this sounds like where his etymological arguments come in.
This is where Noel's research takes a really radical, highly controversial turn. It challenges centuries of how we've understood British history. He asserts that the Saxons, far from being simple, barbaric invaders, were actually the people of Yasharel.
Yasharel, meaning Israel.
Yes, that's Noel's preferred term, emphasizing what he believes is the original Hebrew pronunciation. He argues the Celtic language itself likely developed from ancient Hebrew, and that the Celts, Scots, Danes, Saxons, they're all descended from Yasharel.
Wow, okay. How does he support that?
With a complex etymological argument about the name Britain, he claims it's actually a Hebrew word. He even jokes this idea nearly made him choke on his tea and puff pastry when he first heard it.
So how does he break it down?
He says the Hebrew word bret, or berith, that's spelled B-E-R-I-Y-T-H, means covenant.
Covenant. Okay.
And he points out it carries this sense of cutting. He references Genesis 15, where Abraham, or Avraham, as Noel says it sees God, or Yahweh in Noel's term.
Yahweh.
Yes, Noel's preferred term for God, again emphasizing pronunciation, sees Yahweh pass between the severed halves of an animal as a covenant is cut, established, signifying it's unbreakable.
Right, the cutting of the covenant.
Then he adds that the Hebrew word for people is am, spelled A-M.
Okay.
So Noel argues covenant people in Hebrew is Brit-am, which he says is rather close to Britain.
Brit-am, Britain. I can see the similarity.
And he extends it to British. He says ish or ish. ISH means man in Hebrew. So British means covenant man or covenant men.
So the name itself implies a covenant people.
That's his argument. He suggests even the phrase, the British are coming, might have a deeper prophetic meaning, a return of a people bound by a divine promise.
How does he link this specifically to Yasharel or Israel?
He connects it directly. The people of Yasharel, he argues, are the people of the covenant. He cites Exodus, or Shemeth, as he calls it, chapter 19, verses 5 to 6.
What does that say?
Now, therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and guard my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation.
Obeying the voice means guarding the covenant.
For Noel, yes, it's intrinsically linked. He also points back to his paper, The Lost Tribes of Tartaria, where he posits Britain was ground zero for the Millennial Kingdom.
The Millennial Kingdom.
A prophesied era of divine rule, enlightenment, whose history, Noel argues, has been largely suppressed. This idea of Tartaria refers to a lost, advanced global civilization he believes has been intentionally erased from history, linking Britain to this forgotten, glorious past.
Okay, so Britain as the land of the covenant people, possibly the center of a lost kingdom. But how does Saxon fit into Yasharel?
This is another bold claim. He says, Saxon is a corrupted form of Isaac, or rather Yitschaq's sons.
Yitschaq? Isaac?
Yes, again, Noel's preferred pronunciation for Isaac. He anticipates people dismissing this, calling it terrible research, but he labels that wishful thinking.
What's his evidence for Saxon meaning sons of Isaac?
He states that the Phoenicians, whom he identifies as the Yehudim, his term for Jews, called the house of Yasharel, the Bethsak, which he translates as house of Isaac.
Bethsak, house of Isaac.
And furthermore, he notes the children of Yasharel were also called Saxuna by others, again meaning sons of Isaac.
Saxuna, there's a phonetic link there too.
That's what he's pointing to. So his radical conclusion from all this etymology and biblical reinterpretation is
What?
That Camelot fell, but only in the wake of the Saxons' arrival. He argues that centuries later, Arthurian storytellers bemoaned the Saxon invaders, but for Noel, that's more that Orwellian talk.
Meaning the storytellers got it wrong or were deliberately misleading?
He suggests the latter, that in reality, the sons of Yasharel were arriving to claim their kingdom. It completely overturns the narrative of a foreign conquest. He sees it as a restoration, a fulfillment of covenant, not a defeat.
So the invasion was actually a homecoming, in a sense.
In a very profound sense, yes. He references another paper, Tefi, The Divine Conception of Yitschaq, specifically a section on the people of the covenant within his Stone of Scone talk, to provide more context for this huge reframing.
This reinterpretation of the Saxons, then, leads us directly into Noel's analysis of a really pivotal Arthurian prophecy.
The dragons.
Merlin's vision of the red and white dragons, and how Noel connects that to the 536 event, and even further. It's a fascinating, maybe unsettling, allegorical reading, he believes, reveals more about this concept of his story.
It is, and Noel is very specific about linking this ancient prophecy to, well, modern interpretations and historical events. He sees it as a coded message, essentially.
So walk us through Merlin's prophecy according to Noel. Where does it come from?
He details it as found in Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, Book 7, Chapter 3. The scene is set with Vortigern,
The 5th century British warlord king.
Right. He's with Merlin, and they witness this terrifying fight between a red dragon and a white dragon down in a pit. The white one initially gets the upper hand, makes the red one flee, but then the red one comes back stronger. It implies this cyclical struggle.
Okay, so what's Merlin's interpretation?
Merlin, in his prophetic mode, declares, "Woe to the red dragon, for his banishment hastens on. His lurking holes shall be seized by the white dragon, which signifies the Saxons who you invited over."
Explicitly linking the white dragon to the Saxons.
Explicitly. But the red denotes the British nation, which shall be oppressed by the white. The prophecy goes on with dire predictions: mountains leveled, rivers running with blood, religion destroyed, churches ruined.
Grim stuff. But does it end there?
No, it ends on a note of eventual triumph. At last, the oppressed, the red dragon, the Britons shall prevail and oppose the cruelty of foreigners, the white dragon, the Saxons.
Okay, so how does Noel read this? What's his Orwellian take here?
His take is really cutting. He says Geoffrey of Monmouth and other Arthurian writers were not a fan of righteousness and were essentially bemoaning the Saxons.
Why is that crucial?
Because Noel believes these Saxons were the sons of Yitschaq, arriving to claim their rightful kingdom. So the Arthurian authors lamenting their arrival is, for Noel, a misrepresentation of a divinely ordained event.
So Geoffrey's work, by painting the Saxons negatively, is part of the scrubbing of his story.
That's Noel's argument. He points out the irony. Geoffrey's work, which bemoaned the Saxons, survived and was celebrated, while the true identity of these supposed Saxon oppressors remained confused, deliberately so, perhaps.
And the red dragon. How does Noel interpret that symbol?
He sees the red dragon as signifying our past as well as our present short-season controllers.
Controllers, meaning a hidden power structure.
Exactly. A continuous force throughout history, actively manipulating events and narratives, still at play today, in his view.
And he connects this prophecy directly to the 536 event.
Explicitly. He states the timing of the Saxons' conquest would occur during the 536 event, which he again describes as the fire reset, volcanoes, mysterious fog, melted cities, the 18-month sun eclipse.
Does he link specific lines from the prophecy to 536?
Yes. He highlights Merlin predicting, "It shall rain a shower of blood, and a raging famine shall afflict mankind." Noel emphasizes the raging famine as a known direct consequence of 536.
And the shower of blood.
He rhetorically asks, blood raining down from the heavens. How biblical is that? Drawing a parallel to apocalyptic scripture.
Okay, what about the dragon's fates in the prophecy?
He notes the prophecy says the red one, the oppressed Britons, will grow strong after fatigue. And then, misfortunes hasten upon the white one, the Saxons, and the buildings of his gardens shall be pulled down.
How does Noel interpret that? Buildings pulled down.
He sees this as the Saxons, the white dragon, raising buildings that would eventually, centuries later, be pulled down. He says, it's all too familiar, we've been over this already, time and again, implying a repeated pattern of construction by one group followed by destruction and rewriting by the controllers.
What kind of destruction?
He connects this trampling over the cities of the kingdom to another prophecy he attributes to the release of the Watchers.
The fallen angels concept.
Yes, and links it all to the scrubbing of his story. He powerfully asserts the red dragon has returned to power and his vengeance was unleashed upon the magnificent architecture of the Millennial Kingdom saints.
And he gives examples.
He cites the destruction of the old world cities disguised as the world fairs, like the one they burned down in Chicago, as a prime example of this ongoing historical revisionism, a deliberate dismantling of a prior glorious age hidden in plain sight.
It's clear Noel isn't just seeing a battle of mythological creatures here. He's layering this with a profound, almost conspiratorial, historical, and spiritual interpretation.
Absolutely. It goes much deeper than just legend for him.
And he takes this dragon imagery even further, doesn't he? Linking it to powerful biblical concepts, making it less about history and more about a battle for spiritual control.
Precisely. He delves right into the symbolic representation of the red dragon. He brings in William Blake's famous illustrations as a visual touchstone.
The great red dragon paintings.
Those ones. And then he poses this crucial question, who is oppressing whom now? He uses this imagery of the lovely lady of the court, clothed with the sun and the moon at her feet, being mugged in the back alley by you-know-who.
Implying the red dragon, the controllers, are the muggers, the oppressors now.
That's the strong implication. And this leads him straight to the book of Revelation. He explicitly links the dragon who makes war with the Kodashim, or saints.
Kodashim meaning saints, okay.
Links that dragon to Revelation 13.7, which says, and it was given unto him the dragon's power to make war with the Kodashim saints and to overcome them, and power was give him over all kindreds and tongues and nations.
So the dragon's given power to overcome the saints.
Yes, and Noel anticipates the argument that saints might not mean those who keep God's commands, so he points directly to Revelation 14.1 for clarification.
Which says,
here's the patience of the Kodashim. Here are they that guard the commandments of Elohim God and the faith of Yahusha.
Elohim and Yahushua, Noel's preferred terms for God and Jesus again.
Yes, emphasizing the Hebrew pronunciations he believes are original. So, saints are clearly defined as those who keep the commandments and the faith.
What's Noel's conclusion from this biblical link?
It's stark. He says, name any age, day of the week, or reset, Yasharel is only ever defined as those who obey the Torah, reminding us, of course, of the sons of Yitschaq.
Torah being the law, the first 5 books. So obedience defines the true people of God, the sons of Isaac Saxons, in his view.
Exactly. And he then contrasts this sharply with what he calls the Church of Merlin.
The Church of Merlin, what does he mean by that?
He suggests it is sounding more and more like that branch of Christianity which says the law has been done away with, thereby allowing them to go about living with the spirit of Antichrist, which is lawlessness.
He's strongly rejecting that theological position.
Vehemently. He says, no thank you. And he ends this whole section with a very strong, almost defiant declaration about Merlin.
What's that?
He says Merlin forgot to include the part where Michael the archangel, the protector of the sons of Yitschaq, casts him into the lake of fire.
Wow. That's a definitive statement on the ultimate outcome of this spiritual battle he sees.
Absolutely. It frames the entire Arthurian narrative within this cosmic conflict.
And Noel adds another layer to this, connecting Merlin and Arthur's lineage back to Roman Britain.
He does. He reiterates that Merlin, introduced by Geoffrey of Monmouth as Aurelius Ambrosius, was supposedly one of 3 sons of Constantine III.
The Roman emperor in Britain around 407 AD.
Right. Constantine III. His other sons were Constans II, who co-reigned briefly, and the 3rd son was Uther Pendragon.
Arthur's father.
Arthur's father. And Noel points out the meanings. Uther, Welsh for terrible, and Pendragon, literally chief dragon, or head dragon.
Chief dragon, linking back to the red dragon symbolism.
That's the connection Noel makes. He brings up esoteric traditions where Cain from Genesis is considered the literal son of the serpent, not Adam, implying a demonic lineage.
Okay.
And then Noel asks provocatively, What are they telling us regarding Arthur, though? Did the Red Dragon sire yet another child?
Casting doubt on Arthur's own lineage, suggesting a connection to these controller forces.
Exactly. Linking Arthur himself through his father, the chief dragon, to this red dragon symbolism, suggesting a potentially more sinister, maybe non-human origin for the fabled king within Noel's framework.
So, diving even deeper now, Noel challenges the very nature of Camelot's leadership, starting with Merlin himself and his, well, surprising lineage, according to Noel.
Very surprising, yeah.
And then broadening the scope to suggest an even larger historical conspiracy, hinting at Rome's hidden hand in shaping these legends, possibly making Camelot a deliberate creation.
This is truly a radical reframing. It takes the legend from this tale of, noble kings and knights.
Right, the Round Table ideal.
To potentially one of calculated deception. Noel opens this section with a really provocative claim about Merlin's origins. He says Merlin was conceived by an incubus.
An incubus, a demon.
Yes, in folklore, a male demon believed to prey on women. So that immediately sets a very different tone for Camelot's advisor.
Definitely. How does this affect the view of Arthur?
Well, Noel questions the whole notion of Arthur as a Christian king. He asks how one defines Christian in this context. He argues that Christianity is such a broad term, often so far removed from Yahweh's instructions in set-apart living, that describing it as being enveloped by shades of paganism is being kind.
So he's suggesting the Christianity of Camelot wasn't aligned with what he sees as true faith.
That's his point. He asserts Camelot was actually the ideal kingdom by those who preferred to rebel against the true kingdom of Yitschaq and live an unclean life.
Yitschaq, meaning Messiah. So Camelot was a rebellion against the true kingdom.
A rebellion against a divinely ordained, pure kingdom based on adherence to the Torah, yes. That's Noel's perspective.
Where does he get the incubus idea for Merlin?
He delves into Robert de Boron's Merlin text from the 13th century. He says the biography starts in Sheol, the Hebrew term for hell or the underworld.
Okay.
Apparently, right after Yahushua HaMashiach, Jesus, broke its bars and released the captives, Noel frames this as a kind of satanic spin-off.
A spin-off?
Yeah, like the demons in hell, having lost power over the set-apart Ruach, Holy Spirits, plot revenge. Their tactic, create a demon child.
Merlin,
a child who would manipulate Mashiach's kingdom upon the earth, slyly deceiving men and women so as to lead them on a leash away from the message of the prophets and back towards hell.
How would they create this child?
Since demons apparently lacked reproductive capability, the conspiracy needed the compliance of an unclean Ruach inhabiting the ether, a demonic spirit living in the air, essentially.
And Merlin himself acknowledges this origin.
According to the text Noel cites, yes, Merlin supposedly openly declares, "I would have you know that I am the son of a devil who deceived my mother. He was one of a kind of demon called Hequibedes who inhabit the air."
I miss it.
Apparently, and claims his power and intelligence to know everything that has been said and done comes from this demonic father.
But doesn't Merlin usually claim to be allied with God?
Yes, and Noel addresses that. Merlin, in the text, then tries to convince people he is allied with the Lord, and his foreknowledge comes from him, saying, "From the moment it pleased our Lord to grant me this knowledge, I was lost to the devil."
What does Noel make of that claim?
He flatly refutes it. He declares Merlin never once passes the Deuteronomy 13 test for a true prophet.
What's the Deuteronomy 13 test?
It's a biblical test. If a prophet's predictions don't come true, or if they lead people to worship other gods, they are not from God. For Noel, Merlin fails this. He concludes the demons were in fact successful in creating a man opposite of the prophets of Yahweh.
So Merlin's claim of switching sides is false, in Noel's view.
Yes. Noel challenges anyone to show him a single prophet of Yahweh who held the power of the devil rather than the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit.
How does this demonic Merlin then connect to Arthur's conception?
Noel links it directly, portraying Arthur's conception as another deliberate manipulation. He highlights how Merlin helps Pendragon shapeshift into Igraine's husband, Gorloy, using a herb.
The story where Pendragon deceives Igraine.
Yes, and Noel puts it bluntly. Pendragon then raped Igraine. He says Pendragon played the part of the incubus and asks rhetorically, and who helped him achieve that act but the son of an incubus, meaning Merlin.
So Arthur's conception itself is tainted by demonic influence through Merlin's help.
That's Noel's uncompromising conclusion. He says, it couldn't be any more obvious by this point. The kingdom of Mashiach existed and Camelot was its satanic counterpart. He proposes Camelot wasn't Christian at all, but a cleverly designed imitation serving forces opposed to the true divine order.
Wow. That is a radical reframing of a beloved legend, suggesting this deeper, more sinister agenda behind it all. Casting Camelot not as a shining example, but something much darker.
It really turns the traditional view on its head.
And Noel doesn't stop with Merlin, does he? He expands this idea of the architects of Camelot to include other figures, like Morgan Le Fay.
Exactly. He broadens his examination to include Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister, sharing Igraine as a mother.
Right, same mother, different fathers.
And Noel notes the grim detail again. Pendragon, Arthur's father, killed Morgan's father, Gorloy, on the same night Arthur was conceived through that deception.
Adding another layer of darkness to the family history.
Definitely. Noel then cites a passage from Merlin describing Morgan being sent away to study in a nunnery, and study she did until she knew a good deal about the secret arts and much about astronomy and physics, and she made use of her knowledge.
Okay, so she became knowledgeable in secret arts at a nunnery. How does Noel interpret that?
This is where he makes another highly controversial connection. He links it back to claims from his Muhammad paper.
What claims?
He says this confirms what I stated in the Muhammad paper, that Augustine was setting up spy networks disguised as friaries and nunneries, and that Khadija, Muhammad's first wife and controller, was a member of one.
Augustine. Setting up spy networks in nunneries.
That's Noel's assertion. He emphasizes that Augustine organized spy networks in Britain, by the way. He called it his missionary journey, but you and I know better. For Noel, these religious institutions were fronts for intelligence gathering and control.
So Morgan Le Fay learning secret arts in a nunnery fits this pattern for him.
Yes. It leads to his bold, overarching conclusion. Camelot, it seems, was a project of Rome, suggesting a grand historical manipulation orchestrated by powerful hidden hands tied to the Roman Empire and its successors.
Rome was behind Camelot.
That's the provocative idea Noel puts forward. He reinforces it by going back to that family tree. Merlin, Aurelius Ambrosius, as one son of Constantine III, the Roman Britain emperor, his other sons Constans II, and Uther Pendragon, Arthur's father.
The chief dragon.
Right. Uther meaning terrible, Pendragon meaning chief dragon or head dragon. And Noel again poses that chilling question, echoing the cane serpent idea. What are they telling us regarding Arthur, though? Did the red dragon sire yet another child?
Tying it all together. Demonic Merlin, Roman influence via Augustine's alleged networks, Morgan Le Fay's training, Arthur's dragon father, all pointed to Camelot as a manufactured, potentially sinister entity.
That's the picture Noel paints, a kingdom designed to serve a specific agenda of the controllers, disguised as something noble.
Okay, so with such a provocative narrative of hidden origins, secret agendas, Noel doesn't just stick to the text, right? He explores the actual physical locations linked to Arthur.
He does, and challenges the official histories at every turn.
Suggesting the very ground holds clues that are being deliberately suppressed or ignored. Let's start with Tintagel, Arthur's supposed birthplace. Noel finds the conventional story there just doesn't add up.
Doesn't add up at all in his view. He takes us to Tintagel Castle in Cornwall. According to Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur from 1485 and Geoffrey of Monmouth's History from 1140, this is where Arthur's story begins.
The story of Pendragon, Igraine, and Merlin's magic.
Right. Pendragon lusts after Igraine, wife of Gorloy. Merlin transforms Pendragon into Gorloy's likeness. Pendragon commits the deed, Arthur is conceived. Noel highlights that detail about Arthur's birth shout, and the midwife crying, "Here is a dragon, he shall be the terror of Britain's foes."
Why does Noel emphasize that?
He finds it telling. Sarcastically notes, it's not every day that someone gives birth to a dragon baby, implying maybe a literal connection to the red dragon forces he's been describing.
Okay. What's his critique of the official history presented at Tintagel?
He points out that officials claim the ruins we see today are from a 13th century castle built by Earl Richard, 1st Earl of Cornwall, during the High Middle Ages.
So long after Arthur's time.
Long after. Yet Noel observes they then forget all about that in the gift shop and sell Arthurian paraphernalia, LOL. He sees a blatant contradiction between the academic claim and the commercial exploitation of the legend.
What about archaeological evidence?
They admit finding Romano-British artifacts, but then, Noel notes, they state there's no evidence of them having built any structures there, which he again dismisses with LOL again, suggesting a convenient omission of facts that might point to earlier, significant occupation.
What's his main issue with the timeline?
It's the dates. Mallory published in 1485, okay. But Geoffrey of Monmouth published his history, claiming Tintagel as Arthur's birthplace way back in 1140.
Right.
So Noel asks, How do officials explain Geoffrey's claim if the existing castle wasn't built until 1233 by Earl Richard? That's 97 years after Geoffrey's book came out.
What's the official explanation?
Noel finds it laughable. It's that Earl Richard wanted to establish a connection with the Arthurian legends, and so he had a castle built.
So he built it because of the legend that already existed.
That's the official line. But for Noel, this isn't just a historical quirk. It's basically an admission of a fabricated history designed to fit a narrative after the legend was established by Geoffrey. He sees it as proof that historical accounts are constructed, rewritten, serving specific agendas. Part of the his story manipulation.
Okay, so from Arthur's alleged birth site to his purported resting place, Noel takes us to Glastonbury, a place already steeped in legend, Christian and pagan.
Deeply layered site, Glastonbury.
And here, Noel found not just the famous grave marker, but something truly astonishing. A detail that official history seems to, well, conveniently ignore, or maybe even suppress.
This is a really remarkable part of Noel's investigation. It gets right to the heart of his argument about suppressed knowledge, about things hidden in plain sight.
So he visits Glastonbury. What's the significance of the site for him?
Well, it's purported to be Avalon, the mystical isle. But even more significantly for Noel, it's supposedly the location of Britain's first church. Planted, legend says, by Joseph of Arimathea himself.
The one who supposedly brought Christianity to Britain very early on.
Exactly, a foundational figure. Noel describes his personal visit, the emotional impact of finally finding the marker for Arthur's burial site.
What about the excavation, the famous one from 1190?
He recounts that story. Ordered by King Henry II, workers at Glastonbury Abbey dig down, unearth this leaden cross buried between two ancient stone pillars.
In the inscription?
Hic jacet sepultus in Clatus Rex Arturus in Insula Avaloni. Noel, having studied Latin, translates, "Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon."
But historians often dismiss this, right? Say the monks faked it.
They do. Noel notes historians suggest the monks planted the evidence to attract pilgrims, gain wealth, establish official history, while dismissing Arthurian legends as mythology. Standard skeptical take.
But Noel says, hold on, look at what they found next.
Exactly. Before dismissing it as a hoax, consider the next discovery. Digging deeper, down to an amazing depth of 16 feet.
16 feet, that's deep.
Very deep. They find a hollowed-out oak tree trunk used as a coffin. Inside, skeletal remains of a man and a woman.
Okay, and the astonishing detail.
The man was a 9-footer.
9 feet tall, seriously.
That's Noel's emphasis. He was a 9-footer, no word on the woman's height, though she was presumed at the time to be Guinevere.
A 9-foot King Arthur. How does Noel frame this?
He draws a direct parallel to Ralph Glidden's controversial discovery of supposed Catalina giants in America, implying that discoveries of unusually tall humans are often suppressed or discredited to maintain the standard historical narrative.
He uses the phrase exposing plot holes in the Jesuit history books with your pick and shovel.
Yes, and warns about the ubiquitous Smithsonian truck backing up to remove inconvenient evidence, suggesting a systematic cover-up of a giant human past.
What happened to these bones after the 1190 discovery?
Noel details the subsequent exhumations. In 1191, the bones were placed in a tomb in the Abbey church choir. Then, in 1278, the tomb was opened again for King Edward I and Queen Eleanor.
Edward I. What does Noel make of that?
He points out nearly 100 years had passed since the initial discovery. If the 9-foot height was a hoax, he argues, Edward I's eyewitness exhuming would be the perfect time to speak up and say something. He did not, implying the giant's height must have been real if it wasn't challenged then.
Anyone else see them?
He mentions Edward III's visiting the tomb in 1331, but says it's unclear if he saw inside or commented.
What about the tomb itself? Was it described?
This also raises Noel's suspicions about historical manipulation. It wasn't apparently described until the antiquary John Leland visited Glastonbury in the 1530s.
Leland, the father of English local history.
Right. He described the tomb as black marble with 4 lions at its base, a crucifix at the head, and an image of Arthur carved in relief at the foot.
Why does Noel find this suspicious?
He questions why it took nearly 350 years for description. He asks if Leland was under the pay of Henry VIII and buddies with propagandist Thomas Cromwell, suggesting a potential manipulation of the record to create a specific image for the Tudor monarchy.
And the tomb disappeared soon after.
Noel notes the tomb was assumedly dissolved along with the abbey in 1539, just after Leland's visit. Convenient timing, perhaps, reinforcing the idea of information control.
This leads Noel to some central questions, doesn't it? about the giant and Henry VIII.
Crucial questions, he asks. Why would they hoax their Arthur discovery with a giant when none of their Arthurian literature, written either before or afterwards, upheld the story? If it was a hoax for pilgrims, why invent a giant not mentioned in the popular legends?
Good question. And the other one? About Henry VIII.
Even more pointed. How is it that Henry VIII would destroy an abbey devoted to Camelot's king when he himself not only claimed to be descended from Arthur, but he also based his existence upon the fulfillment of Merlin's dragon prophecy?
That is a huge contradiction. Why destroy the resting place of your supposed ancestor, the proof of your legitimacy?
Exactly. Noel underlines the significance of Glastonbury as Joseph of Arimathea's church site too, noting the ramifications of that are never paused to be appreciated nor tested in the history books, implying a deliberate downplaying of its foundational Christian importance, maybe because it conflicted with Henry's agenda.
Does Noel offer answers to these questions?
He speculates. Maybe the giant story was invented much later, centuries after the fact, precisely to throw us off the scent of where he's actually buried and also where Joseph of Arimathea planted his church.
A diversion?
Possibly. This, he suggests, would make Henry VIII's destruction of the abbey somewhat less audacious if the real significance had already been obscured.
So does he believe the giant story or not?
He seems to find it convincing, along with the Latin cross identifying Arthur. But he doesn't definitively rule out Glastonbury as Avalon. He says he's keeping options open, especially since he hasn't visited the second proposed site in Wales. It shows his process questioning, considering alternatives, not claiming absolute certainty.
Okay, and finally, Noel explores another compelling location. Not for Arthur's grave, but for Camelot itself.
Cadbury Castle.
A site offering not just historical resonance, but maybe stunning physical evidence and a unique personal experience for Noel, further challenging our assumptions.
Yes, Cadbury Castle in Somerset. Noel notes it only really became a serious Camelot contender in 1542 when John Leland reported that locals considered it the legitimate site.
What's it like physically?
Noel describes it vividly, a massive earth mound with cake-like layers. He identifies these as walls sloping upwards, hinting at a mighty large fortress. He explicitly connects it back to the 536 event, suggesting whatever existed here before the 536 heat index event was a mighty large fortress indeed, implying an even more impressive structure was impacted by that cataclysm.
Was there serious archaeology done there?
Oh, yes. He delves into the significant excavations led by Leslie Alcock between 1966 and 1970.
What did Alcock find?
Alcock, a professor of archaeology, noted occupation going way back, 4th millennium BC. But crucially, it was occupied by a major Brittonic ruler in the whereabouts of 470 AD, pitting us smack dab in Arthur territory.
Smack dab in Arthur territory. And was it significant?
Hugely. Alcock concluded Cadbury was the largest known fortification of the period, double the size of comparable phrases, suggesting unparalleled importance.
Oh, the evidence of connection?
Shade. Yes, they found Mediterranean artifacts, indicating extensive trade routes, a sophisticated network. Alcock also found the fortress was likely abandoned or destroyed by 580 AD, and noted Saxon artifacts hinting at their possible conquest, which aligns interestingly with Noel's reinterpretation of the Saxons' arrival.
Are there other clues linking Cadbury to Camelot?
Noel highlights geographical and linguistic ones. It's only 16 miles to the northwest of Glastonbury Abbey. That proximity strengthens the link to Avalon and Joseph of Arimathea's church, creating this powerful cluster of legendary sites.
And the name.
He points to nearby medieval villages, Queen Camel and West Camel, and the River Cam, arguing locals imprinted their memory onto the map's Cam relating to Camelot. He also suggests Cad and Cadbury is a corruption of Cam, directly linking the place name.
Noel visited Cadbury himself, right? What was his experience?
Yes, and he contrasts it sharply with, say, Stonehenge. He describes Cadbury as a sleepy little town, no parking lot, no ticket booth or gift shop, and few, if any, tourists.
Why does he find that telling?
He pointedly notes, the English heritage has yet to arrive. He questions why, given its strong Camelot connection and proven archaeological significance, it remains largely unpromoted, unrecognized by official historical bodies, almost deliberately ignored, perhaps.
Did he have any unusual experiences there?
He describes it as a near-mystical experience, lying under a grand oak tree, feeling transported, hearing what seemed like clopping hooves, leading to this vivid vision of a shining knight and his lady.
Wow.
He describes trekking the whole perimeter, imagining the ancient village with its taverns and blacksmith shops, as well as added gate security points, which would have snaked along the walls. He even notes a remaining 2 or 3 foot wall at the top, a physical remnant of its formidable past.
What's his final conclusion about Cadbury?
It's powerful and rhetorical, he says. If it isn't Camelot, then we have before us the largest castle or fortress of the Roman era, and yet nobody thought to tell us about it in the books.
Encapsulating his whole argument about suppressed history.
Exactly. Suggesting sites of immense significance are being intentionally ignored or downplayed to maintain a specific, perhaps false, narrative of the past.
So, Noel's deep dive into 537 AD, Camelot, the Saxons, Merlin, these physical sites, it leaves us with a truly astonishing reframing of history. It really challenges us to look beyond the conventional narratives, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It forces you to question what you think you know and how you know it.
It forces us to reconsider the very foundations of our understanding of that whole period.
And it raises profound questions about historical truth itself. Noel's overarching argument is this fundamental re-examination of the Dark Ages.
Not dark and ignorant, but
potentially a millennial kingdom, a period of enlightenment, advanced civilization, magnificent architecture, which was then actively challenged, maybe overthrown, by powerful, controlling forces.
represented by figures like Merlin
Whom Noel asserts was the son of a demon.
and the symbolic red dragon.
Representing what he calls the controllers, primarily Rome, and its enduring influence, in his view.
Let's quickly summarize the core claims Noel makes throughout this work.
Okay, core claims. First, 536-537 AD wasn't just bad weather or a battle. It was a pivotal, catastrophic fire reset that ended an entire era, erased a prior global civilization.
Right. Second,
Camelot itself. Far from being idyllic or Christian, it was potentially a satanic counterpart to a true kingdom of Yitschaq, orchestrated by figures like the demon-conceived Merlin, designed to mislead.
third, the Saxons.
Not barbaric invaders, but the sons of Isaac, or Yasharel, arriving to reclaim their rightful covenanted kingdom, a narrative Noel says was deliberately obscured.
And finally, the suppression of knowledge.
A pervasive theme. He points to the 9-foot giant King Arthur allegedly found at Glastonbury, ignored or discredited. The unacknowledged grandeur of Cadbury Castle, a massive fortress left out of the main narrative.
And he even connects Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries to this.
Yes, especially Glastonbury. He sees it as a continuation of the Red Dragon's vengeance, deliberately trampling the magnificent architecture of the Millennial Kingdom saints, destroying evidence of that prior age. And doing so despite Henry's own claimed Arthurian lineage and reliance on Merlin's prophecy. It's a huge contradiction Noel highlights.
And Noel's conclusion from all this?
He forcefully states that the scrubbing of his story is already centuries in the making. It's an ongoing process.
This deep dive, it really forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions, doesn't it? About who controls our historical narrative, what truth might be hidden beneath the official accounts, the celebrated legends.
And why certain figures are celebrated while others are demonized. It challenges us to reconsider the foundations.
It definitely broadens the scope of what we think we know and invites a really critical examination of how history is presented to us.
You can't look at these stories the same way again after considering Noel's perspective.
So here's the final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If Noel is right, even partially right, and there are deliberate attempts to obscure or rewrite pivotal historical moments, how might this reshape our understanding of other historical periods we take for granted?
Yeah, what other dark ages might not have been so dark, or what enlightenments might have been viewed very differently if we apply this kind of critical lens Noel suggests.
Could declines have been orchestrated, advancements suppressed? And looking forward, what might be the real story of the next fire reset, if Noel's framework holds true? When the controllers perhaps attempt to rewrite history once again.